Hello everybody, for those of you that don't know, I'm Sensei Dean Romanelli, and I'm going to take an opportunity first to welcome our volunteers and thank all of them for participating and helping us to put on this wonderful tournament event. Without you, we could not make the day happen, and thank you for helping us bring everything together. What I'm going to do in this video is detail some of the finer points of what we can do to be a good volunteer when it comes to score calling and timekeeping for the tournament. When we do this, there are two main areas that we're going to be working. One are the individual performances that you see on the floor. We call those kata. Also weapons kata, or individual weapon performances. Aside from that, what you'll also see is the sparring performances. Now those are when you have two people that are literally competing against each other at the same time on the floor. There will be little dragon's flag sparring and actual contact sparring in the higher belts. And all the scoring that's involved is very similar. We'll go through all that and explain some of the differences. When it comes to the kata, the individual performances, the team's going to consist of two people. One's going to be responsible for calling up the competitors and recording the scores, while the other one's responsible for adding up those scores using the provided calculator and then recording that score on the sheet. We do ask that you use a calculator for all of the score mathematics. We want to make sure that any error that happens is no fault of ours as much as possible. And of course, we want to avoid any error in our tournament. The first thing to do is to call up the competitor and also call up who's to perform next on deck. This is going to keep the division running smoothly and keep everything moving right along. After each competitor performs, they're going to be scored by all 5 judges. One person should record the scores under the appropriate column on the sheet as the junior black belt assistant stands and reads them off. So a junior black belt will stand at the end of each performance and they'll clearly call out the scores. So all you have to do is listen and record those scores. We just ask that you write neatly so we can see those scores later. After the person records the scores, the second person will determine the total score using that calculator. To calculate a competitor's total score, the high and low scores are dropped and the middle 3 scores are added together. This should be done as each competitor performs, not at the very end. So as each competitor performs, we're going to take the 3 middle scores and add them together to create a median score, which is going to be their total score. After all competitors perform, you simply find the top 3 scores and assign them first, second, and third places by writing a 1, 2, or 3 in their appropriate row. One of the things we always caution our staff to do is make sure you double check and make sure you have found the appropriate first, second, and third place scores. Especially in a larger division, it can be easy to miss a score that is needed for the awards. In the case of a tie, there are a few different ways that we can try to break that tie before having a competitor re-perform. In the case of a tie, we compare the competitors, both competitors' highest score first. If one of their highest scores is different than the other person's highest score, then we have a clearly designated winner in that particular comparison. If that is not the case, if they're the same score, next we're going to compare the middle scores. And if there's a difference, we use that difference to decide which one has the higher placing in the division. Mathematics will tell you that if those 2 scores are also the same, the third score is also the same, which means now we have to have a re-performance. In the case of a re-performance, we want to make sure that we rewrite in the competitors in a new row on the division sheet. This way, the original scores and the new scores are going to be preserved for later use. If a competitor has to perform again, just rewrite their name in a blank scoring column. When a division is over, make sure you keep all the division forms right there at the table. Every single ring has a coordinator. The coordinator is the person that is in charge of the ring. They're in charge of organizing the division, and commonly they are people that have done your job before. So if you have any questions, they're a great person to ask. They do have another copy of the division form, but they do need your original form to turn in to the head table. So keep those there. And every single coordinator has a binder that is for that ring that has the whole day mapped out. Please only let the coordinator touch that binder so they can keep track of their job and do it well. We really appreciate your support in that, and we really appreciate you helping us out with this part of the tournament. Every single division will be awarded a first, second, and third place, and there are medals designated for that at the tables. For certain divisions and certain belt levels, there's also medals that are used for participation for those that don't receive a first, second, and third place. The coordinators will know who and what that means, and they'll take care of that. The next portion of this presentation will be scoring the sparring, or what we call kumite divisions. Again, this is going to consist of flag sparring divisions and contact sparring divisions. The team's going to consist of two people. One's going to be primarily responsible for keeping track of the score, and the other one's going to be responsible for keeping track of the time. Always call up two people to spar first, as labeled on the form, and also call out who is on deck to perform next. On the division form, every single person is labeled red or white accordingly. It's always good to call up the competitor by name and also what color they are. That's going to help the judges and the center judge keeping everybody straight and organized. Do the same thing when calling somebody up to perform next on deck. As the match begins, use the stopwatch and start keeping track of the time. The time frame for every single match is 2 minutes. This is a continuous 2 minutes, meaning that the only time is stopped is when the center judge asks it to be. So they'll look at you, they'll look at the table, they'll turn to you and say, stop time. If they ask you to stop time, you can pause the time at that moment. When they restart the match, you would then continue the time. If the time runs out, there's a beanbag at each table. Lightly toss that in the middle of the ring and yell time. That's going to let the center judge know that the time has run out. As a match runs and progresses, be sure to record the half points as designated by the judge in the appropriate boxes on the division sheet for each competitor. Keep a careful eye on the match just in case the center judge makes a mistake in the amount of points a person has. So the center judge will commonly keep track in their head of where they are in the match. But if you see them make a mistake, please don't be afraid to bring that to the center judge's attention. Believe me, every single judge is going to appreciate catching a mistake before it goes further down the line. That's for anything in our tournament, by the way. Please let us know as soon as possible if there's any type of error or mistake. It's much easier to fix those things on the spot than it is after the fact. So we're all human beings. We all make mistakes. We don't mind being corrected. And if you make a mistake, we don't mind helping you correct that either. So please keep that in mind. One of the things you also want to do is be ready to subtract a half point if there's a penalty and it's announced by the center judge. So the center judge will look at you and say, -1/2 point. If that's the case, you're going to subtract because of the penalty, which is why we mark everything in pencil, so you can erase said points. As a person wins, they're moved up in the bracket. When we say up, we actually mean from left to right, or in your case, from left to right in the bracket. Keep in mind that someone who loses a match may spar again if they're up for a 3rd or 4th place position. And those spots, those marks, are clearly designated on the division form. If a division has 3 people in it, it will be run using a modified round-robin style rather than the bye system that is typically found on most forms. What this means is that the first 2 competitors will spar, and the winner will spar the 3rd person. If the 3rd person wins, then the division is over, because all 3 places are clearly designated as 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. If the 3rd person loses that match, then they must also spar the person who lost the 1st match. That's going to help us figure out who should have 2nd and 3rd place, since the original person won both matches. There are generally very few of these in the tournament. And if you have any questions about it when they come up, the coordinator can help, as can the center judge. After all matches are over, you want to record the names for first, second, and third place at the appropriate position on the division form. Keep in mind the division form is labeled third, then second, and then first because that's the way they're read off. Second usually is not an issue, but sometimes you can accidentally flip first and third, so make sure you have those very clearly denoted on the form. Again, please keep all division forms at the table. The coordinator will be around to collect them and deliver them appropriately. And remember, that's their binder. They'll make sure you have your copy when you need it. If you follow these rules, it's really simple and really easy. One of the things I'll finish with in this presentation, every single dojo instructor has been provided with a copy of these guidelines, as well as samples of the forms that we use for the tournament. It's really good practice to see your sensei, your instructor, to receive a copy of these forms. This is going to help you familiarize yourself with the process, so when you get to the tournament, it'll be very, very simple for you. What we find is, we typically will put somebody new at this with somebody who's experienced it before. By the time you've done your first division, you're literally on cruise control, and it's really, really simple. But if there's an error or a question, please bring it to our attention right away. We're happy to help you with whatever you need, and we truly appreciate you coming out and being a part of this tournament. We could not do it without you. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about what you've heard in this meeting, you can go ahead and ask your sensei, your dojo instructor, and if for some reason they don't have the answer, they have the means to finding it out. Thank you again. We appreciate you, and enjoy our event.